Tonight, one of the UK's biggest trade unions launches a furious attack on Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Right now, the woman who hopes to be the next Chancellor is giving a major speech to business and finance leaders, where she's vowing to bring about a new chapter in Britain's economic history. But Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham has accused her of lacking a coherent plan and says that Reeves is sticking to phony fiscal rules. I'll be joined by Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's been defending the Shadow Chancellor's plans. Also tonight, I've been speaking to Sports Minister Stuart Andrew about the government's plans to bring in an independent football regulator. He also tells me ministers are going to hold a round table with the big sporting bodies about the issue of trans women playing sport very soon. And on the day ministers intervened to try to help the beautiful game, we'll look back at other times they've participated. All that and more with Jess, Phillips and Jonathan Gullis, who'll be with me for the next hour. It's Tuesday. I'm Beth Rigby, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Good evening. Rachel Reeves is on the cusp of becoming Britain's first female Chancellor, a job she's apparently wanted all of her political life. Tonight, she's delivering the prestigious Mays Lecture, a big deal in the financial world. And she'll explain how her economic vision boils down to one simple word: stability. No bold moves on tax, spending or borrowing, tough fiscal rules, iron discipline, protections for the Bank of England, a stronger independent fiscal watchdog. If it doesn't sound that exciting, well, that's because it isn't. And that's to the disappointment, perhaps, of some in her party, and, well, perhaps some voters who maybe want more. In fact, tonight, Sharon Graham of Unite says Labour's plan for growth is for the birds. The union boss is clear. Meddling and tinkering around the edges isn't going to deliver the serious growth Britain needs. But, believe it or not, that is the plan. What Reeves has been doing for the past 2 years is making sure Labour's trusted on the economy. And she's intensely political about not giving the Conservatives any room to undermine that message. Let's not forget, economic competence is a top election priority. And if you want proof, it was Reeves who torpedoed the £28 billion a year for borrowing for green investment that was to kill off a Tory attack. And she's not going to give them any more ammo before election day. When you're 20 points ahead in the polls, why rock the boat? Reeves reckons stability itself brings the change. Well, the Shadow Chancellor is still speaking. Let's go live to the City of London and have a very quick listen.
The motor of innovation and entrepreneurship. So let me say this. Without the promise of stability, how can business invest with confidence? Without security, how can we ask the entrepreneur to take the plunge and start a new business? Without security and a safety net to fall back on, how can we expect an ordinary person to retrain, take a new job or change career? When change increasingly appears disruptive and the future darkly uncertain, there is a natural urge to recoil from change and seek shelter from the future altogether. Securonomics is about providing a platform from which to take risks, not to retreat from an uncertain future, but to embrace change and the opportunities it brings with clarity of purpose and stability of direction. To know that people can stand and fall on their own merits.
OK, well, look, our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates was in the audience. Rachel Reeves, I think, is going to be speaking for a bit longer yet. He's just nipped out, and I think we can speak to him. Is he there? What's she saying, Sam?
So, Beth, yeah, you're right, there's quite a long way to go. It's an hour-long speech, 7,000 words, 29 pages, and we're about 20 minutes into it. As you were saying, at the heart of it is this promise of stability. You just heard it in the little extract that you heard just then, and her argument is that stability brings growth, and growth proper sustained growth is necessary, because she points out that since 2010, Britain has been in the bottom third of OECD countries, that's advanced economic countries, about 38 of them, been in the bottom third of that league table since 2010. And she is saying that through stability, that will trigger growth and a return to something better. She criticises the chopping and changing of the Conservatives, be it on plans, be it on prime ministers. You have to say, Beth, that she makes this criticism of instability, even though you've just had some chopping and changing by the Labour Party themselves over their green plans, which, as you say, Rachel Reeves was behind deconstructing and basically getting rid of that £28 billion a year commitment. But she says that they will do things differently. The question, though, is whether stability is enough, whether stability itself gets growth and more tax money that will be able to fund better public services, the promise of so many Labour governments of old, or whether or not her cautious approach binds the hands of her party too much if Labour gets into government.
In the audience, though, Sam, in that room, perhaps after the Liz Truss mini-budget and what happened in terms of market turmoil, perhaps they like stability, even if it's not politically perhaps as popular.
That's right. I mean, I suspect that this speech, deliberately, by design, because the kind of speech that it is a speech by an economist, for economists, and that's the audience in the room downstairs, economists, distinguished business people, distinguished economists who will lap up that message of stability. But in the wider Labour movement, I think there are questions. You had it from Sharon Graham this evening. She says, why is the Shadow Chancellor chasing this kind of ephemeral notion of growth, this hypothetical of GDP, when what people want is change, and change in their circumstances? And in lots of different ways, Beth, that's the argument you hear from bits of the Labour Party, worried that if you don't spend very much if you get into power, if you don't borrow that bit more, and you do rely on things like, Rachel Reeves is talking about it this evening, planning reform, how on earth are you going to get more tax pounds and pence from planning reform? Because you've got to wait for planning to be granted, buildings to be built, people to be using it before actually that becomes something real and tangible that you can use to plug into public services. Is Rachel Reeves' vision bold enough compared to the political challenge of looking safe to the electorate? It's a tightrope, and Rachel Reeves has picked a side, which is safety. She's doubling down on that side here tonight in the City of London. But the question is, will it cause a little bit more grumbling as a result of her insisting this is the only course that Labour can take?
OK, thank you for that, Sam. Well, Sharon Graham obviously given her point of view, but I guess those around Rachel Reeves might say 20 points ahead in the polls, something is working for her. Well, look, a little earlier, Sky's economics and data editor Ed Conway sat down with the Shadow Chancellor and she seemed reluctant to elaborate on any specific spending pledges.
A scene from Britain's industrial heartlands, where a young, promising company is 3D printing car parts. If this country's going to get more growth, it'll depend on places like this. And growth is what the Shadow Chancellor is promising. The only question is, how?
In a way, stability is change, because all we've had the last 14 years is instability.
Her pitch at a prestigious lecture in the city is that what people want is not necessarily more action, but less.
I am confident that we can realise our potential as a country, because I go around Britain and I see so much potential, so many fantastic things happening, and you look at the GDP and the productivity numbers and it's just not there. We need to mobilise all the resources at our disposal to grow our economy, and I'm determined to do that.
But just to be clear, you know, have you got more in the tank? Are there more policies? I understand you don't want to necessarily divulge what the policies are. Maybe you're worried the Conservative Party might steal them. But do you have more policies ready to go when you get into government, or is this basically it?
Well, we've already set out, for example, how we would extend the windfall tax.
But I'm not so interested in what you've already set out. I'm more curious about whether you have more beyond what you have currently set out.
Well, when the election comes, obviously we'll publish a manifesto.
Can you understand why people feel a bit frustrated? They want to hear more policies.
I'm frustrated. I wanted a general election. There needs to be a general election. People are frustrated after 14 years that we're going backwards.
And while Rachel Reeves hasn't said so in as many words yet, the wheels are already whirring behind the scenes.
Now, as I understand it, there is a plan for an emergency budget within 100 days. There's a plan for a spending review as well. But because Labour's so worried about what markets will do, they're worried about the Conservatives stealing their ideas, they just don't want to talk about it. And so you get the impression of them having no new policies. They say they do, but for the time being, they're keeping them under wraps.
Back in the Midlands, Rise 3D is making, or rather printing, its parts. Like the Shadow Chancellor, they worry Britain may be left behind.
Irrelevant of the government, whoever gets in power next and whoever the people vote for, there needs to be an industrial strategy. And I think manufacturing is the backbone to not only provide more jobs, provide more opportunity, provide more excitement in the economy and in the country and in people actually going to work and doing something that's valid, but it's nice to manufacture something.
But he and many others remain unsure about what Labour stand for. More of the same or something different. From what we know so far, it's very hard to tell. Ed Conway, Sky News.
Ed Conway there. Well, Unite says Labour's economic plan is for the birds. The Shadow Chancellor insists, and she's still going, that she's got broad strokes vision for growth through stability. Well, a little earlier I spoke to Shadow Cabinet Officer Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds. Nick, thanks for being on Politics Hub tonight. Now, Rachel Reeves is doing the big lecture tonight, a big moment for anyone that wants to be Chancellor. But she's not had a great reception from Sharon Graham from Unite, who says Labour's growth plan is for the birds and is disguising the lack of any coherent plans to deliver for the real economy. That must be a bit of a blow before you've even given the lecture.
Well, I do think that you will hear a credible plan for growth this evening from Rachel Reeves. Obviously, in speaking to you, Beth, I'm conscious she's not got to the end of that speech yet, but I think what you will hear about, firstly, is a plan for stability. Hugely important, given the disastrous premiership of Liz Truss when unfunded tax cuts were put forward. And it seems the government still has out there a £46 billion unfunded commitment to abolish national insurance.
I'm going to just interrupt there because you're making out that's because they're going to phase out national insurance, and that's not in a manifesto. It might not happen, and they might not be the government, and they've also said they don't want to do it in one parliament. So,
well, they weren't they weren't the qualifiers the Chancellor of the Exchequer used in his budget speech when I was listening to it. But that stability is really, really important. And what we will do is we will put the Office for Budget Responsibility on a footing whereby no Chancellor can have a fiscal event without that OBR forecast. It's really important. Secondly, investment. And for that, we will be creating a national wealth fund for the jobs of the future, carbon capture and storage, green hydrogen, electric vehicles. And in that, just to finish this just a moment, Beth, because it's important, for every pound that we would want to invest from the government, we'd want to attract 3 from the private sector. And thirdly, reform, not least of our planning system, which isn't working for house building and isn't working for businesses either.
So that's your argument. Sharon Graham from Unite says that Labour's sticking to phony fiscal rules, which I think she is referring to sticking broadly to Conservative fiscal rules, that Labour's ruling out taxing the wealthy more, and you've ended up in a straitjacket of your own making, where you can't make radical decisions on increasing public investment because you have set these guardrails for how you want to deliver on the economy.
Well, no, I think that actually being
does it not worry you? Let's just break it. Does it not worry you when the head of Unite, a massive union, is this critical of Labour's economic plan? Let's just boil it down.
Well, obviously, whoever is having this discussion with us, whether it's a trade union leader or indeed anyone else, of course you want to have that discussion. And this evening, Rachel will be making that speech. But in terms of being radical and bringing about change, you can't do that without fiscal and economic stability. That's the bedrock upon which change is built. And that's why, in terms of the fiscal rules, Rachel has set out that we will get debt falling as a percentage of GDP.
It's not going to be that rosy for the country, is it, under a Labour government immediately? The fact is, all of the things you're talking about are going to take years to come through in terms of economic growth. Come on, you're not going to be able to fix the economy quickly and be able to invest more in public services from the get-go.
Well, listen, first of all, nobody doubts the awful fiscal inheritance that there is going to be, and we don't underestimate that for a moment. And that's, I'm afraid, the 14 years of Conservative failure that is going to have that consequence, and we fully accept that.
So you
that doesn't mean
clear, though, to the public, just level with them there, then, you are saying that in the first year of a Labour government, you're going to inherit something that means you are constrained, like you're not going to be able to put a lot of money into public services and things might not get better that quickly.
Listen, of course we're going to have to say no to some things, yes to some other things. Of course, that is the nature of the fiscal inheritance. But at the same time, we are also aware that in addition to reform, our public services do need an immediate cash injection. That's why we're saying we will close the tax loopholes that equity fund managers enjoy. That's why we're saying we'll close the tax loopholes that private schools enjoy to invest more in our state sector. Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that it would be around about £1.3 billion.
Right, and how much is the state's annual expenditure?
Well, you know exactly what it is, but the point...
I'm saying that is like a drop in the ocean, and you know that, so don't try and...
No, but I'm sorry, Beth, let me just come back on that, because that £1.3 billion would pay for mental health counsellors in every single secondary school. It would pay for thousands more teachers. And whilst, of course, you're right to point to the overall amount that the government spends every year, I would push back strongly and say that that will make a difference. Those additional teachers, those mental health counsellors for our young people.
It's saying, I mean, this is what Sharon Graham says, that she says it's time for long-term public investment in our crumbling infrastructure, and things like ripping up building regulations is not going to deliver serious growth. It's not what I say, it's what the union is saying about the lack of radicalism in Labour's plans.
Well, firstly, in terms of sustained investment, I would completely agree that that's been a failure over many years that we are looking to correct with a proper industrial strategy and a true partnership between business, trade unions and indeed the government. And that's certainly something that we need to correct. But it is the very fiscal stability that Rachel Reeves will be setting out tonight that is the bedrock of that.
I guess the point is that you talk about the toughest inheritance, or she has, about that any other previous government has faced. So that's the reality of what you're dealing with. Do you worry, let's put it another way, do you worry that the economic offering that you're going to give the country isn't where you would like to be, that you aren't going to offer people inspiration? Is it a bit depressing for you, that?
Not at all, because I think we do offer credible hope for the future. We've seen what happens when a government comes forward, as Liz Truss's government did, with a host of tax cuts that were unfunded. We've seen the turmoil that caused in the markets. We've seen the incredible damage that did to our international reputation. So to be and aspire to be a government, if we have the privilege of becoming one, that has that fiscal stability over the medium term, that is precisely what attracts investment. What attracts investment here and indeed from overseas is knowing that that stability is in place in the medium term, and that's exactly what a Labour government will provide.
I think we're going to be hearing a lot more of the motto, stability is change. Am I correct?
Given the events of the last few years, 5 Prime Ministers, 7 Chancellors, there's no doubt that stability is a massive change from the government we've just seen.
OK, well, 20 points ahead in the polls. Whatever she's doing, when she talks about the economy, it seems to be working with voters for now. So, Nick, thank you so much for joining us on Politics Hub.
Thank you.
Well, let's bring in our duo for tonight. We have former Labour Home Office Minister Jess Phillips and my fellow podcaster and former Conservative Schools Minister Jonathan Gullis. Jonathan, let's start off with you. Rachel Reeves, she might not be setting the world on fire with her message of stability, but she stuffed you lot when she decided to drop the £28 billion a year in borrowing for green investment. She took a big stick that you were able to beat Labour with on economic competence away from you, didn't she?
Well, what I will say is I find it quite bizarre the Labour Party will moan and groan from the sidelines about the economy, but yet when it comes to actually voting on the budget, choose to sit out and abstain. And the SNP are the only party offering opposition and voting against. And ultimately, Labour Party is committing to retaining the cut in national insurance as well as other parts of our agenda. I think it's important when we talk about stability that we look at what the OBR itself has said about the long-range forecast. GDP will be up every year, GDP per capita up every year, average earnings up every year in real terms, and productivity up every year in real terms, thanks to the tough decisions the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have made.
Just nicely swerved, but going back to the 28 billion, I mean, that was politically astute because it did give you... It took away a stick that you were beating Labour with quite effectively, didn't it?
Well, I think it leans in exactly what we're saying, which is a Labour Party that will flip and flop at every turn. We don't actually know what it is they really stand for.
Or new to your
and most
attack,
importantly,
Jonathan, or new to a Tory attack.
And we don't really understand or really know now what the commitment is in terms of this green investment. What does it mean? How much will be invested? You know, there's lots of questions still lying out there about what will actually happen. Ultimately, what will happen is borrowing will go up, taxes will go up, and growth will go down, because as it always has done under a Labour government, as we saw 2008 to 2009, well as, let's not forget, the largest budget deficit. We inherited £150 billion a year back in 2010, which obviously had to be salted by David Cameron and George Osborne.
What is it
now,
now?
Jess, you know we had the COVID pandemic, we had the war in Ukraine. There's £500 billion worth of public support we put into.
You could blame as well. There's always someone else's
They are real
fault.
events, unless you're saying COVID wasn't a real thing, which I would find bizarre. But ultimately, what happened is we gave furloughs, 80% of people's salary was paid to not work. Businesses getting grants and loans.
Do you think that the deficit that you inherited was then because of the global banking crash, or was that the Labour Party?
It was very reckless spending from a Labour government that was overspending what it had
both
brought in.
ways.
And using dangerous PFI contracts, as we have in Stoke with our hospital, which has now got 200 fewer beds than when it was than the old building, and actually stealing 20 million a year from the front line, and 88 schools in a PFI contract as well.
14 years. Maybe you could have got some more beds out of them.
Well, we actually have. We got £30 million that's built 140 new beds. So I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to push the plug of that, Jess, as well as obviously a new Hayward Walk-in Centre outpatient building.
Would you like to look into the barrel of the camera and say that the NHS is better than it was 14 years ago to your constituents?
In Stoke-on-Trent, where's the camera? Stoke-on-Trent has seen hundreds of millions of pounds into our local NHS, and I'll proudly say that when we're on the stump at the election as well.
Yeah, good luck.
It's a problem for you, though, Jonathan, isn't it? Like, I know you've just, you've come armed with your facts to make this argument, but the reality is that whether you like it or not, Labour, helped by Rachel Reeves, is now more trusted on the economy than it was before, and that is very useful for a Labour Party that has sometimes struggled on that wicket in a general election. That is a problem for
Well, to be fair to
Tories,
Rachel, I don't think it's hard to be better than John McDonnell, who whipped out Chairman Mao's little red book and threw it across the table at George Osborne. I think we'll never forget those scenes personally. So when you've got the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn, who's a very dangerous... How bad was
Liz Truss for you, though? I mean, you're criticising...
Well, let's be clear. What was one of the big issues around that time? Liz was obviously talking about...
Yours?
Well, at the time when Liz was introducing the energy support scheme, it was estimated it could be up to 150, 200 billion pounds worth of support that was needed, because obviously we weren't aware of what the market was going to do after Vladimir Putin's illegal and immoral war in Ukraine. That's now on 97 billion pounds worth of support.
I've got to let my fellow podcaster in, so I'm about to run to the break. Stability is the change. I mean, it might not be that exciting, but it's working, huh?
Yeah, it's working. And actually, do you know what? It seems boring, but do you know, it really, really matters. I have watched the city that I live in have investment that wasn't there when I was a kid brought into it because of the promise of, you know, the big infrastructure, the HS2. And actually, the problem that we are now facing and that north of Birmingham faces is that we now don't know what's going to happen. This constant chopping and changing on things that were meant to drive our country forward, it has just been so tiring. And unfortunately, what it has done is if you look at our rates, if you want some facts, if you look at rates of inward investment and investment within our country, it has been woeful. And we need a ground to build on. And so, yeah, it might seem boring and you might want bells and whistles.
Birmingham City Council did bankrupt Birmingham, let's not forget that, Jess, which is something that Labour should be very ashamed of at the end of the day. The largest unitary authority in Europe. That is something that's atrocious, and that means taxpayers in your constituency, as well as friends who live in Birmingham that I've got, are very upset to see those council tax bill coming in with a huge hike, thanks to poor decision-making.
Believe you me, they're more annoyed at the Tories in Birmingham than they are the Labour.
OK, I don't want to break it up, but I've got to go to a break. Which camera am I on? OK. Coming up on the break, you're watching Politics Hub. As plans for an independent football regulator are hailed by the Prime Minister as a historic moment for football fans, the Premier League says it will weaken the appeal of English football. Back of the net or an own goal? I don't know who wrote that, but it's great. We'll debate that with our panel, Jess, Phillips and Jonathan Gullis, coming up.
Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the President and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, is back-breaking work. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Welcome back. Now, plans to establish an independent football regulator moved a step closer today as ministers introduce new legislation to Parliament. The Football Governance Bill means club owners will soon face stronger tests to stop their team from falling into the wrong hands. But there's concerns, including from the Premier League, that plans could weaken the appeal of the English game. Here's our sports correspondent, Rob Harris.
Football supporters raging against ownership to ensure their clubs still exist to support. Protests now with political power behind them. The Culture Secretary presenting long-delayed plans to regulate the game.
How are you feeling about the football regulator today? Do you know what's happening? No?
Still work to be done to explain to these Leyton Orient players before taking the bill to Parliament.
We're bringing in a football regulator to make sure that football across the board is financially sustainable. There'll be owners and directors tests, and so you won't be able to own a club if you don't pass those tests.
With constant checks on owners and their finances to be allowed to stay in control. But restrictions on who can own a club only go so far. No block on nation states investing.
We are not saying anything about who should own a club, where they live.
You say it's the government. Well, your own department, should it decide potentially then to look at foreign state ownership of football clubs, as it has done with newspapers?
We won't be bringing in any measures in relation to foreign ownership of football clubs.
Relations between the rich and the rest are intense, heightened after the failed attempt to create a breakaway European Super League. And now the Premier League has angered the lower leagues further, blocking a deal to share more of their wealth, something the new regulator could now enforce.
The system we've got at the moment doesn't produce sustainable clubs. It encourages owners to take too many risks, to overinvest, to overspend.
The Premier League warns that the regulator could ultimately weaken the appeal and competitiveness of English football. But the government wants to safeguard clubs like this, League One Leyton Orient, which came so close to going out of business.
Caution from the Orient vice-captain, who's also chair of the National Players' Union.
Definitely think more needs to be done. I'm not a massive fan in over-regulating things, but I think we find ourselves here because the due diligence hasn't been done.
Whether the football regulator has too much power or not enough power, it could soon become the destination for every grievance in the game. Rob Harris, Sky News at Leyton Orient.
Rob Harris there. Well, a little earlier I spoke to Sports Minister Stuart Andrew. I also asked him about the issue of trans women in football. The FA is reviewing its policy on the issue to try and balance the sport being inclusive but also fair and safe. Stuart, thanks for coming on the Politics Hub. Now, you've got news today. You are announcing a new independent football regulator. Will the regulator have power to really investigate owners, find those unscrupulous sources of money and expose all of that before people take over clubs? What will it do?
So this is exactly why we've committed to establishing the independent regulator. You know, Tracy Crouch led the fan-led review, which took 100 hours of evidence, and it just showed that whilst English football is brilliant and successful around the world, there are cases that when it goes wrong, it's not just a football club that's going under. The impact on the community is immense, and particularly on the fans. And so we have designed in this bill that the regulator will have those powers to do proper owners and directors tests and to make sure we know where their source of money is coming from, so we can give more confidence to fans that their clubs will be in safe hands.
OK, so clubs in safer hands. The other issue, the big issue, has been the Premier League versus the English Football League and money cascading down or not. How much money do you think the Premier League should be cascading down to lower divisions?
Well, actually, it's not for me to make that decision. This should be, and this is what we've been pushing all along, is for both the Premier League and the EFL to come up with an agreement themselves, because it's within football's interest to come up with a deal that is workable and sustainable. But because we haven't had a deal so far, we recognise we needed to do something. And so we are giving the regulator powers. So basically, if there's no deal, a backstop can be triggered.
Because the Premier League proposed an increase last week and the Premier League clubs didn't agree to it. Was that a mistake?
Well, look, I mean, we've been pushing them constantly. I've had lots of engagement with the Premier League. We've been encouraging them to come up with a deal. This has been going on a long time now, and that is why we've made sure there's a backstop so that we can get a deal in place.
They can't. The Premier League currently give about 1.6 billion over a 3-year period, and when I think about some of the wages at some of those top teams, that doesn't seem a huge amount of money when you look at how much Premier League clubs are spending on players. I mean, it's insane, isn't it? Do you think that that is enough money? Do you want the new regulator to propose that perhaps more revenue goes down the pyramid? Is that what you'd like to see?
Well, the way we've set up the regulator is that first and foremost it's working with those individual clubs to make sure that they are run on sound finances and that they have proper business plans in place, but also looks at the wider pyramid and makes sure that, you know, it is a sustainable pyramid. That will be, hopefully football can sort that out themselves, but if not, the regulator will have the powers to do so if they need.
There's been talk about the English Football League receiving a percentage of Premier League revenue at about 25%. What do you think? Do you think that's about right?
So I'm not going to get drawn into the deal. I'm not, because I think actually I want football to come up with this, and also it would be the regulator that would make the considered judgment based on all the information, because there'll be the State of Football report, which will give a comprehensive view. And it wouldn't be right for me to make up a figure here and now. It needs to be based on evidence that is well understood by the regulator if need be, but I still urge those two sides to come up with a deal.
And just on, you know, we were just talking before, you're a Leeds United fan. We've seen points deductions in the Premier League with Everton and Nottingham Forest potentially looking at relegation. Might help you, but potentially looking at relegation. Meanwhile, Man City, who have 115 charges against them, are not at the moment being held accountable. Can you understand why many fans think that this is deeply unfair?
Look, I've heard lots of representations from fans when I've been engaging them on the regulator and on the proposals we're putting forward today, and I do understand, you know, some of the concerns. But, you know, a lot of this is down to the Premier League. They are the ones that need to manage their league. It's up to them to do that. What we're focusing on is making sure that those clubs are properly run, that they have those business plans, they have the money, we know where that money's coming from, and we know who the owners and directors are. That's what fans have told us they really want.
OK. Let's move on. Another of the big issues on the agenda when it comes to football is the matter of trans women playing women's football. Should that be stopped?
So look, I've always been really open. I want, you know, sport to be an open and inviting environment, but I recognise that when it comes to women's sport, we have to make sure that sport is First of all, it's fair, competition is fair, and it's safe. It has to be safe for those people. And it is one of the reasons why the Secretary of State and I will be having a round table with national governing bodies from all sports very soon to talk about this issue.
Because Lucy Fraser, the Culture Secretary, who you're going to have the round table with, she said to Sky News earlier that she thought there was an inherent unfairness that if you're not biologically a woman, you have a competitive advantage. She said it's very important that women compete against women. She said, I think a number of sports have looked at this very carefully and come to a decision that it's not appropriate to have women competing against people who are not biologically women. She said that she would encourage other sporting bodies to look at this very carefully, citing rowing and swimming changing rules. Do you agree with that you think there's something inherently unfair?
Well, I think for me, whenever we're having sporting competitions, they have to be fair. I think that's absolutely paramount. I also believe they have to be safe because those participants need to feel they're in a safe environment. But, you know, I have looked at what other sports have done, and they've looked at things like open categories so that people can make that choice. But I think it is important that we have this discussion with those governing bodies because I think there is wider work to be done here. Not enough progress has been made yet, and we need to really deal with that.
It seems like Lucy is minded to encourage football to ban trans women from the women's game, and you seem a bit more equivocal.
No, I'm really clear because I've heard some instances of women saying they've suffered injuries.
Right.
But, you know, I don't know what that is like. So I want to hear from those players. I want to hear from stakeholders. And I think, you know, for me, I will always make sure that fairness and safety are our top priority.
So you're going to have a round table to discuss this matter?
Yeah.
And when's that going to be?
Well, we're working on it at the moment, but hopefully it won't be too much longer.
OK, do you think an outcome before a general election? My next question.
Well, I think that, well, to be honest, it'll be up to the national governing bodies. Our job is to really push them to get on with those reviews. Some are doing it well, others haven't done it yet.
Final question, coming back to politics and football, two of my favourite things. When football teams are losing, the manager's tactics aren't working. He's lost the dressing room. Often the club changes manager. Is that where you're at in the Conservative Party?
No, not at all. Look, Rishi Sunak is focused on delivering for the country. We all want to get on with making sure we you know, recover as we are doing. The forecasting is looking really good for us as a nation compared to Italy, to Germany, to France. So, you know, he's focused on the job. I want us all to get behind him and win the next election.
Are you unhappy about the lack of loyalty towards the manager at the moment, then, from some colleagues?
Look, I just think that when the public think that we're not focusing on the issues that matter to them, they get frustrated. So we're better as a team, united.
Who would you liken him to as a football manager at the moment, Rishi Sunak?
Oh, well, I wouldn't liken him to any football manager. I'd liken him to a hard-working Prime Minister who's trying to get on with the job.
OK. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, let's bring in Jess Phillips and Jonathan Gullis. Jonathan, I can't resist. Rishi Sunak, which football manager is he like at the moment?
Well, I'm going to do what Stuart did and say I'm not going to compare him because he's the Prime Minister. But what I do like, my favourite football manager is Roy Hodgson because as a Fulham fan, being brought up lifelong thanks to my grandmother's indoctrination, he gave me the best days ever when I went to the Europa League final. So,
but do you think you got quite annoyed at the weekend because I've seen the reports about your WhatsApps. There's a little bit of swearing, so I can't. You were saying you're
only one swear word,
bored
which is a
of
miracle
it,
for me.
Bored of the psychodrama.
Yeah.
You said you're really tired of it. So all this talk about changing manager, what's your message to colleagues?
My message is simple. When I go out door knocking in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kids go and talk, people are talking about potholes, people are talking about NHS, they're talking about schools, they're talking about the levelling up investment with some projects which have sadly not been able to get off the ground as quickly as I'd like them to have done. They're talking about what they want to see in terms of new skilled jobs. They want to see their high streets rejuvenated. They are not interested in what is a Westminster bubble story. And what they will do, if we enter this psychodrama even further, if we even entertain the idea of an leadership contest, believe me, the voters will tune back in to say, you may not give us an election within 6 weeks, but we promise you, we'll kick you out and we'll kick you out hard.
Okay.
And we will be not just relegated to Championship, we'll be relegated to League Two, we'll be below 100 MPs. For any colleague who seems to think that things can't get worse, believe me, it can and it will. So shut up and put up. Oof.
What do you think, Jess?
I mean, I'm glad you didn't ask me the question about who I'd compare any
wasn't
leader
going
to a football manager.
I know you well enough to know that
I
would
couldn't
be
name a football manager.
That would not work.
But with regards to the psychodrama in the Conservative Party, you know, the truth is I used to think that Penny would be a quite admirable challenger. She's a woman I quite like and respect, and I think she's quite a good performer. But even with that said, the idea that the Conservatives could replace the leader and, as Jonathan says, not get... I mean, they would be put into, you know, the Vauxhall Conference. Is that a low league in...
Well done.
I'm struggling through with my football-related chat. They would be... I think they're probably going to be in Division 3 anyway, but it would be Vauxhall Conference for them.
I have to go to a break, but quickly to you. May 2nd, danger point. Could the Prime Minister face a confidence vote after the locals, yes or no?
No.
Absolutely not?
No.
Lots of your colleagues disagree. Interesting.
Well,
look, coming up, you're watching Politics Hub. The Tory donor race row over suspended Labour MP Diane Abbott has fueled calls for her party to decide once and for all, is she in or out? Now, how does Keir Starmer solve the problem of Diane Abbott, suspended from the Labour Party 11 months ago for writing in The Observer that Jewish, Irish and traveller people are, unlike black people, not subject to racism all their lives? She apologised at the time, but almost a year on, her case is still unresolved. So she doesn't know whether she'll be a Labour candidate or not in the coming general election. Then, last week, she was at the centre of a race row when Tory donor Frank Hester made vile comments about her. The Labour leadership is now under mounting pressure to resolve the issue and take a decision on her future. Well, Jess and I talked about this on our podcast, Electoral Dysfunction, last week. So apologies to Jonathan, who also has a podcast, by the way. Other podcasts are available, like Jonathan's, but how about we listen to ours? What do you feel about this? Do you think Diane should have the whip restored now?
One of the problems in the Frank Hester response has been people saying, well, he said sorry, but he hasn't actually, I don't think yet, but remember, I'm in a different time zone, said actually that he's sorry that he was racist or acknowledged that it was racist. You know, an acknowledgement, which I believe Diane has made, you would want to see the first black woman elected to Parliament, whether, you know, you like her politics or not. You would want to see this not to be the end of her career. I would much prefer to see Diane Abbott have the whip restored. But, you know, I haven't seen the investigation, so who knows?
That's Jess and I. Jess, you're actually in New York, weren't you? At the UN, Women's Council in UN. Well, look, Jess and Jonathan. Jess, you know, we were talking there. You know, there's not that much love lost between you and Diane, but you've publicly clashed in the past, but you do think that she should have the whip restored. What's the mood in the party and how much pressure are the leadership under now?
I mean, I wouldn't say that they were under sort of pressure that is sort of unbearable, but I think that the view is that I think everybody just wants to see the right thing done quickly. I think we all in the Labour Party, and I'm sure it's the same in the Conservative Party, are sort of a bit baffled about how long these things take. And it just feels like an unfairness to leave somebody hanging by a thread one way or another in these situations. And I think that everybody, again, love her or loathe her, I think people think that Diane deserves, in the twilight of her career, to be able to go out a Labour member of Parliament and be remembered as, you know, the first black woman ever.
But you don't think she should? You think she should retire? I suppose it's not your.
I don't. No, it's far be it from me to tell people to retire from Parliament. But you know, I mean, like, she has been in Parliament since I was 5 years old. I'm now 42. So you know, when I say the twilight of her career, I don't mean the end. She's been there a long time.
Yeah. and Jonathan, what do you think about all this? Because your party, in all of this, as well, has got into some trouble about Frank Hester and not calling it out as racism, perhaps as quickly as could have happened. And then there's issues about whether you should give the money back, the 10 million, and has he given another 5 million? What's your view on it? Do you think that the party should give the money back?
So first of all, what Mr Hester said was disgusting, it was vile, and it was racist in the context as it's been reported. Now, again, these are, I'm going to say alleged because obviously we're waiting to hear for further verification, but to be perfectly clear, those comments are absolutely vile, and I hope not only does he reach out to Diane and make a sincere apology, whether that be in written form or verbally, but he makes a sizable donation to a charitable cause of Diane's choosing, which will, I'm sure, go towards something worthy in her constituency, and particularly, I'm sure, young people, particularly from an area where she was disadvantaged. As for the money, I will be perfectly clear. No, I don't think we should return the money. I find it bizarre that we would essentially be rewarding Mr Hester by giving him back £10 million. And I will say that there's a plague on all houses. We've all got donors who have given us money, who have said things that we're not comfortable with. The Labour Party, Penny Mordaunt last week read out a long list of things that union bosses themselves have donated to the Labour Party, yet have said pretty horrific things towards Conservatives, wanting them to be shot and other things like that. So I think it's important to understand that we should live in a society where forgiveness is understood and given. The Labour Party were found, for example, guilty by the EHRC regarding anti-Semitism. Sir Keir Starmer was stood by Jeremy Corbyn throughout those years.
Do you think...
And yet Jeremy Corbyn's apologised on behalf of the Labour Party, and we've given them the space to change themselves.
Do you think, Jonathan, that you should take more money from him?
If that's a choice for Mr Hester to personally, if he wants to donate, and it's a choice for the party leadership to take that money or not, I personally would have no objection if he wishes to donate to take more money from Mr Hester. OK. Some people... You know, I spoke to a former Cabinet Minister the other day that just said to me that they really don't think you should take money from him and should give it back, but Well, look, I personally think he's got to... the right thing's happened here. He's been publicly called out, publicly humiliated, publicly shamed. He's going to have to live with that. That will be the thing that his Google search history will show forever regarding his contribution to society. His employees will look at him in a different way. He may not actually survive this as anyone in any of the companies that he works for, because ultimately the board will have to take some tough decisions regarding the reputational damage that they've suffered because of their association with him. I think that is punishment enough.
OK, and just quickly, because I didn't ask you about this, that the issue of trans women in sports, there's going to be a round table. Just very quickly, what do you think that trans women should be banned from sports, Jess?
I think that Stuart's approach from the minister there is the one that I would take. Personally, I think that there is an unfair advantage, but I'd want to find a solution that is inclusive, but that protects women's sport.
OK, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we need to protect women, contact sports in particular. I think that trans women are therefore, are biological males, they've had obviously certain physical features that will make them able to do quite severe damage. And we have seen some quite shocking scenes already through lower league football in the women's game. So I think it's a sport-by-sport approach, but I think particularly in contact sports, this should be ruled out.
Well, OK, I think...
Darts is fine.
I think darts is fine, unisex, or... anyone can play anyone in darts. Now, if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to all the latest editions of Electoral Dysfunction. There we are, with yours truly, Jess and Ruth Davidson. Sadly, not Jonathan, although we might get him on, you never know.
Always happy to come
along.
I'll come along.
Jonathan's in. We've got a new episode out on Friday, and you can follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Now you're watching Politics Hub. Coming up, as ministers drum up plans to try to reform regulation of the beautiful game, we thought we'd take a look at when politics and sport collide.
So every year we invite our local Muslim neighbours and those further afield to come in and break their fast with us. We study together looking at a certain theme each year. This year we looked at the theme of friendship, and then we break bread, literally, together. We hear the call for prayer on our bimah, on our ritual stage, and then we eat and we sit and we talk for hours often.
It's enjoyable, it's really interesting, and I think it's needed. A massive reason why I do the interfaith work that I do is based on Islamic teachings. And I try to revolve my life around the Holy Quran, and the Holy Quran teaches us that as Muslims, we have a duty to protect people of all faiths and religion and to protect places of worship. So working with Alith and going to the iftar during Ramzan is something that I really look forward to. And I've been there more than once, and it's been incredible.
Definitely. I think that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are on the rise. And the only way that we break down those barriers is by having really deep, meaningful conversation and building relationships. Friendships are the most important thing that we can offer one another at this time.
I think there'll always be conflict in the world. There'll always be issues and conversations that need to be had. And events like this, interfaith events, are super important for us to have an open, honest conversation. On stage at the Interfaith, we were talking about how our friendship began working with the United Nations and how it's just developed over time. And we've had hard conversations, bearing in mind the current conflict. But it's important that conflicts don't drive wedges between friendships. Rather, we use a friendship for conversation and dialogue so we can move together and build the bridges of unity and unite on our common denominators.
I think we are modelling what this can look like and what real dynamic friendships look like in the world. We are publicly showing how we can talk to one another, be together, and putting an image out for the younger generation of this is something you can do too, it's something you can achieve. When they see people their own demographic do it, it feels more attainable to them.
The beauty of social media is that you're able to put out messages that can reach a vast audience across the world. And there are a lot of misconceptions of the Jewish community and the Muslim community. I think having a platform on social media allows you to remove misconceptions, allows that space for conversation and dialogue, which is so important, and for us to work together to make the world a better place.
Welcome back. Now, there's a lot of parallels between politics and sport. Both have competition and tribalism. Plus, there's a fair bit of playing dirty and crying foul, although not from Jess and Jonathan, of course. And today's proposal for a football regulator got us at the Politics Hub thinking about when politics and sport collide. We thought we'd bring you some of the more memorable examples.
Oh, he's dropped it! He's dropped it! Where you can support Man United, the Windies and Team GB all at the same time. Of course, I'd rather you supported West Ham. Thank you. Go, 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 go! Oh.
I actually don't know where to start with that, so I'm just going to pass it over to both of you.
Mean, the thing about Keir Starmer is that he actually plays football.
He does play football. But once a week, right?
Once a week, I think. But I genuinely think that we should sort of try and avoid pretending that we do something that we don't do as politicians. I find
get caught out.
Yeah, and
you?
I find like cosplaying as builders is a bit weird as well. Like if you go somewhere, you have to dress in the clothes. Like I have been on building sites and managed not to wear the clothes.
What about when Keir Starmer went to visit NATO? Then he got his full, full uniform
politicians
on. Like,
love to do that. Mind you,
Beth, I'm a member of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, and as part of that, you get to wear the uniform. So believe me, I'm not going to attack anyone because I love the fact that I can send photos to my fiancée and go, look at me.
Jonathan, do you play football?
I play very rarely when I'm desperately needed, but I was a rugby guy growing up. And when I say growing up, I mean I've abandoned rugby since the age of about 22. If I went back now trying to look cool, I would look pathetic, I would show my age, I would show my out of shape. I think politicians do best. Sometimes maybe sit in the stands and watch it, but don't have to get down the pitch trying to pretend that they can do it.
I'm going to have to wrap it, which is a shame because I could have talked about this for at least 10 more minutes. But unfortunately, that is it for tonight. Now, Sophy, I think, will be back tomorrow at 7. But up next, it's the UK Tonight with Matt Barbett. Stay with us. He'll be talking about the conspiracy theories circling around Princess Kate.